through your word. We're thankful for all that we have. We know that everything that we have comes from you. We ask that you would bless us at this time as we study from your word, or that you would give us the wisdom and understanding to better understand it and you and your will for our lives. And Father, we are grateful above all things that you have sent your Son to be a redeemer and to redeem us from our sin to your salvation. We pray these things in Jesus' name. All right, so Psalm 45. We have a long introduction here. For the chief musician, sent to Shoshanim of the sons of Korah, a maskil, a song of loves. My heart overflows with a goodly word. I speak the things I have made to the king. My tongue is the pen of a ready writer. You are fairer than the children of men. Grace is poured into your lips. Therefore God has blessed you forever. Gird your sword upon your thigh, O mighty one, your glory and your majesty. And in your majesty ride on, because of truth and meekness and righteousness. And your right hand shall teach you fearsome things. Your arrows are sharp, the peoples fall under you. They are in the heart of the king's enemies. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of equity is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness above your fellows. Myrrh and aloes and cassia, all your garments, from ivory palaces stringed instruments have made you glad. King's daughters are among your honorable women. At your right hand stands the queen in gold of Ophir. Hearken, O daughter, and consider, and incline your ear. Forget also your own people and your father's house. So will the king desire your beauty, for he is your Lord, and bow down to him. And the daughter of Tyre shall be there with a gift. The rich among the people shall entreat your favor. The king's daughter within the palace is all glorious. Her clothing is inwrought with gold. She shall be led to the king in embroidered work. The virgins, her companions who follow her, shall be brought to you. With gladness and rejoicing shall they be led. They shall enter into the king's palace. Instead of your fathers shall be your children, whom you shall make princes in all the earth. I will make your name to be remembered in all generations. Therefore shall the peoples give you thanks forever and ever. All right. What is this psalm about? Yes, sir.
Extolling God.
Extolling God, okay. This is a safe assumption for many of the Psalms, if not all of them, right? So that in some measure they are all about this, but this one is different from others. What is perhaps lacking from this psalm that is in a lot of the Psalms that we have read heretofore? Lament. There is no sadness, there is no complaint, there is no question. There is nothing to be lamented, nothing to be sad about in this psalm. It is entirely joy and praise, start to finish. What else is this psalm about? Very specifically, what is the topic covered here? It's not necessarily obvious, might be in your notes. It's implied heavily from some of the latter verses. There's a specific occasion this appears to be written for, a type of event. How long shall we stay in suspense here? It's written for a wedding. What's being described is a wedding. There is a period of address to the king, the bridegroom, and a period of address to the bride as well. There's a shift from speaking of or to a man to speaking of or to a woman in the second half. It's not evenly divided here, and there's a third section at the end that kind of pronounces blessings on them going forward and their children. But it is, at least in figure, of a wedding as well. Purely song of praise and joy, no lament. And it appears to be a royal wedding, right? This isn't just anybody's wedding. It speaks specifically of and to the king. It speaks of the power of the queen and the richness thereof. So this is an event. It does seem to be, did I put this in the next one? Yeah, a little bit. It does seem to be written to an actual king, that this was probably originally done for a specific person to be married specifically, an individual and a particular event. But the king is certainly idealized within this telling. The king is not a real person. No one is perfect, right? The king is described in a way that is excessive for any real individual. But this is often done for this sort of thing. When you have to give a toast at a wedding, or you have to give a speech as the best man or something, do you focus on the reality of the fact that, yeah, he's not perfect, there's going to be tough times. You might say there's going to be tough times, but the whole point is to talk about the ideal, to look towards what is to be sought after, right? That you want and encourage and push for people to do what is right, to be loving, to have happiness, right? And again, at a joyful occasion, they're not focusing on the downbeat sides of things, on the sadness or the possible problems in life. This is all pointed towards an ideal. And as such, it works very well to extol God and to talk about this individual as being a Christ, a Messiah, the Messiah figure who is to come. It becomes prophetic of the coming of Jesus. And the New Testament writers certainly understood it when they quoted it as looking forward in a prophetic way to the coming of Jesus and to the image, did I put this in the next note? Of Christ as bridegroom and the church as bride. So it works on these two levels, right? And many psalms are like this, at least two levels, where it's written in one particular time and place, often probably for a particular person or particular event. But because of the way the psalm is written and the inspiration of the writer, it then is possible to continue to use what is written and understand it also in a more general and non-specific way. It applies to the church as a whole. Or you can talk about the king, but then you can understand who the king is, the true king, the one great king being God, right? Or a prefiguring of the coming Messiah who will be king over all the world for eternity, right? This is what Jesus is as well. So it operates or functions kind of in both these ways, and we'll look at a little bit of both as we go along. So it does seem to be intended to be sung to the king instead of by the king. There's a number of psalms that appear to be written for the king to recite or to sing them himself, right? Requests for success in battle, or David specifically writing about his own trials and travails. There's one, Psalm 51, where it's after his sin with Bathsheba, that it is written for himself, right, as the king to speak aloud. And this is, instead, it appears to be intended to address him. Again, not necessarily David. The tune as well, in the translation I had, it said Shoshanim. This is translated lilies. It appears that this is a common enough tune that they just have to say that, and it appears to also be used, based on the superscription, in three other psalms, 60, 69, and 80. These are also set to tunes that have lilies in the title. So he borrows his tune and then perhaps puts the words to it. So the first verse carries on with an introduction and description. If we look at that again in 45, he simply says that he is so worked up by what is going on that he cannot contain the words that he has. They just come spilling out of him. Yeah? Oh, so at the very beginning in this inscription, it's the director of music, and then the next line, to the tune of lilies. There's apparently music that they knew and they understood. We don't know what it is, it's lost to us. But it would be like saying, hopefully it would be a little more pleasant and less repetitive, but it would be like saying, this is to row, row, row your boat. Right? I could write that down, and I don't have to write the music in there. Someone who knows the tune could scan the words and go, oh, okay, I see how this fits. I can sing this to the tune I already know without needing me to give any more information. Yeah. What attributes then, when he really begins his his praise here in verse 2. What attributes are ascribed to the king? I'm sorry? Handsome and grace. He's indicated as having grace. He's indicated as being good looking. This is kind of the first one. It's translated different ways in different. I have to turn back one page. This is a problem when they cross page dividers. The fairer than the children of men, the most excellent of men. It does seem to simply indicate that he is an ideal. And this is part of the maybe over-the-top kind of praise of someone. Very few people have no flaw. And so to say that there is nothing, no one like him, no one has ever looked like him, is a bit of hyperbole, but it is again this kind of idealized way of saying, you look good. You are an ideal, someone people can emulate, someone people want to be like. And this is again praise to the king who is supposed to be that, kind of the example for the nation. And again, this works well when we translate and look forward as a prophetic utterance to Christ, that Christ is the one that we should all emulate. There is no one that is better than he. The other one, though, grace, how is that one phrased? It's not a trick question. It says it's poured into or on his lips. What does that mean? I think it means he's eloquent. The way he speaks. He can speak clearly and persuasively and beautifully. Not only does he have the look, not only does he appear the way that a king should appear, he sounds the way a king should sound. He says the things a king should say. He's not just a pretty face, right? He can speak to back it up as well. Yeah.
Probably has all the social graces.
The social graces, yes. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. That he is able to be and say, to say the things that you ought to say and to do that in a social setting. Again, suitable for a king, right? It's not the same as everybody else, but he fulfills the role he is supposed to play well. It moves on to say that, therefore, God has blessed you forever. The important thing to understand here is that it's easy to get this backwards, right? That he is being blessed because he has these attributes, which is not, I think, what this is attempting to say. He's not blessed because he's good looking, right? He's good looking and now God blesses him. He's eloquent and now God blesses him for that. Rather, the fact that God has blessed him is made manifest in that he is these things. In other words, they are the secondary effect, not the cause of him being blessed. He is blessed, and then therefore he has these attributes. They are evidence of God's blessing him, not the reason God has chosen to do so. And it's easy to get that flipped in our mind sometimes. We give people more credit than they're due, thinking that they deserve honor simply because they are in some way appealing. But that's not necessarily the case, right? It is better to deserve that honor and then to be found appealing as a consequence. It's easy to get that backwards. The word mighty in verse 3 is an indication of strength and power, certainly. O mighty one. But it also has a sense that can mean to prevail or to conquer. The same word is used, I believe, for the floodwaters. The floodwaters are mighty over the earth. They prevail, cover, and conquer the earth. It's a word that's used frequently in context indicating someone who is the best at what they do. The mighty hunter, a mighty warrior. God is referred to as a mighty God. The word is a kind of a superlative, right? You have reached the apex of what it is that you are doing. And so in this context, him being girded on with a sword, meaning he is the greatest conqueror. He is someone who is unable to be defeated. Again, superlatives being used to honor the king on a holy or auspicious day with the wedding. In verse 4, the literal is a little bit different. So we have translations in the NIV, in your majesty ride forth victoriously. In the one that I was reading a moment ago, in your majesty ride on prosperously. The literal is in your majesty prosper, and then and is assumed or inferred, prosper, ride. We infer that there's an and, prosper and ride. It's an interesting way of phrasing this. The prosperity, the prosperousness, or the success is associated with the riding, but they could be as well two separate things, right? That because he has this power and majesty, that he is both successful and adventurous or active. And so it gets a little, how do I want to say this? Anybody ever see the original Star Trek, right, with Spock? You know, he live long and prosper. The whole idea there is not that you are supposed to just make money. We think of prosper as to make money or to be wealthy or to be financially successful. But I think as in that phrase and in the way that it is used here, it is more expansive. It is for the things you do, whatever they are, to be a success, right? So that when he rides to war, he is successful. That when he is at home, his kingdom is at peace and is, full of happy and contented subjects. And that in his decisions that he makes, right, when he has to decide judicial cases, he decides rightly. That everything that he is to do is to be a successful endeavor. I feel like I'm really rushing through this, but there's so much stuff that's in here that's good to get to. There is an imperative, of course, in here as well, that to prosper and to ride, he is told that he is to do these things. And we've talked about this before, that the command word, when used with someone who the speaker should not be ordering around, such as when we address God, or in this case, when the psalmist or the singer is addressing the king, he can't really command the king to do these things, to ride, is an indication of a great desire for it to happen, right? That it is an enthusiasm rather than an attempt to truly command. But he goes on to say that he needs to ride on and be prosperous and victorious because of truth and meekness and righteousness. That it is in just causes that he will have success. Not in anything he might possibly choose to do, but in the things that we do that God would approve. As long as he is following the right way, these things will be met with success. What's interesting about this, there are three virtues here, but if he is, again, to be successful in battle, we've had the girding on of the sword and the riding forth. How are you to fight meekly? We have truth and righteousness, right? You can be honest, and you can be righteous, but how does one fight in a manner that is meek? Yeah.
Doesn't meekness mean God-controlled?
In the Hebrew, I'm not sure. It could well be. Yeah. No.
I don't know about the Hebrew.
Yeah. And that's an excellent point that my lack of linguistic skill has left empty for me. It's possible that, again, as long as he is submitting himself, and it's certainly true, that as long as he submits himself to the authority of the Lord, these things will then follow, right? That God has made a covenant with the kings of Israel that if they follow God, then they will have successful reigns, and their descendants will continue to reign. I think.
And we see that all throughout the Old Testament. The kings that did well, that they followed God, they were blessed. They did well. Those who didn't last very long usually.
Or even if they did, they would die in violent ways. Their line would be cut off. Yeah, the covenant certainly is manifest in that history, right? Those that follow it do benefit, and those that do not are cut down. Yeah.
It seems to imply a lack of the greed and bitter envy and stuff that other kings have followed. In this one, the meekness goes along with the other two, in truth and righteousness. that that's the self-controlled person as a king, not just I'm conquering the world, I'm going to be the one world ruler kind of thing.
Mhm.
It's within truth, within righteousness, within good, he could rule.
Yeah, and that's certainly true. I think that the only other thing I would add to this is that these can be thought of as the causes on behalf of which he will fight. That is, for those that are in the right and have truth on their side, those that are righteous, but then meekness, those who are unable to do this for themselves. Right? That the king is appointed to be the defender of the downtrodden. Those that are oppressed, he should be relieving of their oppression. Those that have not that ability, right? These meek and humble people, the people of his kingdom, that it is on their behalf rather than for his own glorification. That his glory comes from acting on behalf of others. And again, as a prefiguring of Christ, it works very well. This is one of the attributes that Jesus exemplifies in laying down his power and authority to come to earth. Yeah?
So in ancient times, most kings came to the idea that I am put in place by God and exemplified, or at least offered that they were doing it in truth and righteousness and meekly because they're following God. And then we have the opposite where we see, what was that king of the Old Testament that was turned into a donkey and ate the grass?
It was Nebuchadnezzar, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's just the opposite. It shows where that was. And when he came back to himself, he returned to be this kind of king.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, there are examples, the counterexamples. It's shown through both positive and negative in different ways. All right, at the end of verse 4, we have a word here. Some translations render this awesome, some have it as terrible. Mine in particular renders it fearsome. It's an interesting word and an interesting way of saying this. This is a thing that is, the king is to do things that will strike fear. The terrible is the one I enjoy the most of these because it is so commonly, misused is not right. The meaning of it is contracted over time. We only think of it as negative now, but of course terrible in its initial form meant that which inspires terror. And this could sometimes be, or at times be, a positive attribute. That is to say, God could be terrible in that he is so great he inspires terror in those that witness what he does and is. And the king is enjoined to do this. Again, to take on and to embody divine attributes on behalf of God. That the king of Israel is to be the representative of God to the nation in some sense. Not in the same way as the priests were, but as the judge, as the leader, as the one who enforces the law upon the country. And in the same way that we are commanded to fear God, right, to understand how great he is and relative to ourselves, the king is enjoined to have similar attributes, right? That the things he does should strike on to the hearts of people. Yeah.
And that's the same idea of, we have a phrase, war is hell. War, what's happening in his right hand is the sword in his right hand executing war or judgment, and that is terrible. We know the consequences of that to those who have done wrong. So as he's doing that or netting out the justice, in that sense, there's that terribleness there too.
Yeah, boy. I could easily get distracted and we could talk about what Sherman meant by that. But yes. I take your point. The arrows that come up, his arrows are sharp, that they are in the heart of the king's enemies, are really more as a generalized indication of his prowess in battle. And the weapons that he carries, it doesn't necessarily, of course, have to be literal arrows in every case. We had a sword earlier that he's girding on. Verse 6, I really wanted to get to verse 6, and this is why we kind of been rushing a little bit. Verse 6 is interesting. So if we look at this one, it says, I'm going to read from the NIV here first. Your throne, O God, will last forever and ever. A scepter of justice will be the scepter of your kingdom. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of equity is the scepter of your kingdom. So I was able to find 5 different ways that we could try and understand or interpret verse 6. We have been, or the person writing this has been addressing the king up to this point. In this one, it says, your throne, O God. So we can understand this as implying the verb to be, which, again, my Hebrew is non-existent, so I'm relying on others. Something about the construction of this sentence indicates that verb to be or is has to be part of it, at least to indicate tense. But if you place it in different places, obviously you get different understandings. You should understand this as being your throne is God forever. That is to say, the king is enthroned within God himself, that God is the one upon whom his power rests, the source of who he is. It can be understood as your throne of God is forever. That is, God has given it to you, and it is enduring. Your throne is like God, that is to say, eternal, right? Forever is eternal. This could be a shift. Linguistically, he's just shifting gears right now, deciding to praise God directly and speak directly to God. And the king could be addressed here as Elohim, right? Using the term that most often refers to God. The problem with a lot of these is that the very next verse, verse 7, if you look one verse down, is that there is a distinction made about who he is speaking to. You love righteousness and hate wickedness, therefore God, your God, has set you above your companions. The next verse, he clarifies again about whom he is talking. And it doesn't make a lot of sense unless he's actually addressing the king in this verse. So this is the problem with having to put so many words on the screen. The common understanding of this, again, among most translators, and you'll see this in the translations that you kind of have, right? As I say, the NIV simply says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever, is that he's actually addressing the king as Elohim. And this is not without precedent. People have this term applied to them in other places. Moses, notably in Exodus, chapter 7, verse 1, in the law, the judges of the people, it's chapter 21, 6 in Exodus, and then a couple times in Psalms as well, Psalm 82 and Psalm 138. There are several things about this that are worth pointing out. One is that this is not the holy name of God. We talked about this last week before, that this book of the Psalms shifts from a primary use of Yahweh to speak of God to using Elohim. But that doesn't mean, again, that Elohim necessarily every time refers to God in the way that Yahweh does. We have clear examples where people have that term applied to them. And then Hebrews chapter 1, verses 8 and 9 cites verses 6 and 7 as a prophetic rendering of the coming of Christ. It's probably worth, I didn't put it in the slides, I'm going to flip over to Hebrews and read that real fast. Hebrews. I'm going to start in verse 5. The writer of Hebrews is talking about Jesus. For to which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son, today I have become your father? Or again, I will be his father and he will be my son. And again, when God brings his firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. In speaking of the angels, he says, he makes his angels winds, his servants flames of fire. But about the Son, he says, your throne, O God, will last forever and ever, and righteousness will be the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has set you above your companions by anointing you with the oil of joy. The writer of Hebrews understands this as being prophetic of the coming of Jesus. And it's possible, of course, that this can be understood in multiple ways. I don't want to constrain anyone, put you in a box about how you have to understand this. But it does appear, from the linguistic side of things, that the king is addressed directly as Elohim. That this is again, I would understand this, my opinion is, my own personal opinion, that this is an idealized form throughout the whole psalm. It was originally intended to address a particular king, but that the psalmist, being inspired, wrote a psalm that is applicable to be prophetic to the coming of Christ. I think beginning to end, the figure of Christ shines through this entire psalm. Is it blasphemous? I don't think so. I don't think that what he did would qualify as that. I think because, one, we have the evidence of its inclusion. If we understand the Bible to be inspired, I think that we would understand that it would not be included if it were to say something incorrect about people without some sort of footnote, as it were. Right? There are instances in the Bible where people blaspheme, but there are instances as well, it's shown that they are punished for these things, that there are consequences, and it is shown to be morally wrong. And we're not getting that here. As well, the references in Exodus and elsewhere in the Psalms where this word is used to refer to high-ranking people generally, though rare, I think indicate that it is a possible understanding of this, and distinct, I will point out, from the holy name Yahweh, which is never used that way, right? Which is why when Jesus uses it of himself in the Gospels, right, before Abraham was I am, he says, they understand it. The Jews understand that to be blasphemy in a way that they would not have understood this. So it's a complicated and interesting passage, and you will probably encounter something like this at some point in speaking to people that wish to try and undermine your belief in the consistency of the Bible by talking about how people are referred to as gods. This may also come up potentially when you're speaking to Mormons or other people that believe that we can become divine ourselves. So, all right, before I move on, and I'm clearly not getting to the end of all these verses, are there any questions or comments? I don't want to leave this particularly thorny and complicated point if anybody is still... Okay. Well, good. I'm glad we covered that well. It moves on to speaking of the king being upright, and he receives joy as a reward for loving righteousness. I've flipped away from Psalm 45 here. Now I'm all lost. It speaks of a scepter of equity. The word there, equity or justice, is literally the word upright. He has an upright scepter, one that is not crooked or inclined or bent to nefarious ends. And as a consequence, he has that, and his kingdom is just, and he has loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Again, it's idealized. Which king was perfect? Which king utterly abjured all wickedness? None of them, but as a way of putting the Platonic ideal in front of the king at this auspicious moment, this day of wedding, it encourages him to strive to an ideal and serves as a prefiguring of the true king, the final king, Christ, the Messiah coming. We have a couple more figures. These are wonderful and beautiful ones here, in my opinion. Myrrh, aloes, and cassia, all your garments. It says that he is actually clothed with perfumes. Essentially, he wears such wonderful clothes. He is so enriched and the things he has in some sense are so expensive that it is as if he is wearing the perfumes themselves. And then, of course, ivory, a very valuable thing. To have an ivory palace is a figure of extravagant wealth and luxury. Right? The amount of ivory you can get to actually do anything with in a building kind of sense or decorative sense is that you can use it as like gold, right? That is you can inlay things with it, you can be decorative with it, but you couldn't really build with it. How could you get that much? So an ivory palace, again, a figure of wealth and luxury, as opulent as possible. It moves on at this point to speaking of the queen. King's daughters are among your honorable women. At your right hand stands the queen in gold of Ophir. This is a transitional verse or a transitional moment, speaking still of or to the king, that he, in some measure, is shown to be wealthy and powerful by those who surround him and those who come to show him loyalty. Right? There are other people of nobility, daughters of kings, and his own queen is decorated or dressed in the purest of gold. The queen herself, then, receives 4 imperatives in the first verse that addresses her. Depending on how they're translated, you might see slightly different words, but she's told to listen or to hear, to see or to consider, to incline her ear, and then she's told to forget. This stacking of imperatives speaks to the urgency or the importance of what is being spoken about. And you could almost even put these together in a couple different ways, right? That one is to be heard and attended to hear and to incline, and another is to see this thing and to forget another, right? To learn this new or to pay attention to this and to ignore this, that these are paired up. But what is she intended to do when she is told to forget her father's house? Yeah.
Well, earlier, it says that the man is to leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. And so she is now the wife of the king and cannot go back and say, well, this is what my dad did. This is what I grew up. Because she's under a different household now. And things will be different than what her dad maybe did.
Yeah, exactly. That this is a change where she has to have, and I have more notes about this coming later, but she's marrying not just any ordinary man as well, but the king, right? And even if she is a foreign princess, even if she has nobility in her own right, the injunction is the shifting of allegiance. That previously it was here, now it is here. That she has to forget, not literally, because you can't expect her to completely not remember these things, but to ignore. These things have to be put aside, and her new and true allegiance, full allegiance, has to be given to the king. It is not just to her husband. There's a verse, I think it's 11, that talks about this, that she is to bow down to the king. The important part of this, I think, to understand is it's not saying that this is necessarily part of her responsibility as the wife, though certainly they would have understood the wife being obedient to the husband, but that the degree to which she must pay homage to the king or homage to the king is because she is now the king's subject. He is not just husband, he is also king of the nation. And everyone and anyone is expected to have that same understanding as well. And this is, again, I'm running out of time, I'm probably over time already, but a figure as well for the relationship that we have with God. Christ is bridegroom, church is bride, that the love exists, that God so loves the world that he sends his son into it, right? John 3:16, to redeem us, but yet we are still subjects, right? And that we worship and obey God, that we obey Christ as King of our lives as well. Now, there is no possible route for disobedience, that we don't get to just do our own things either, right? There's a dual relationship in a sense, or two tracks, perhaps. All right, I am past my time, actually, looking at the clock on the wall. There was so much interesting stuff still left in here. Any final questions, comments? We can certainly step back if something previous has occurred to you. Okay, well, I appreciate everybody's time and your attention, also your patience with my inability to get all the way to the end most weeks, but we will talk about Psalm 46 next time. Thank you very much.